Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. When the whispers first began in Genoa City, they were dismissed as nothing more than rumor, the kind of idle speculation that often circled around Susan Walter's character, Diane Jenkins Abbott, who had returned from the dead once before and who, over the years, had been branded with every label imaginable: schemer, manipulator, seductress, survivor, but never victim, because Diane always found a way to slither out of the traps life set for her. Yet in September, a chilling truth emerges that strips her of the armor she has worn for so long. Diane is gravely ill, her once unshakable confidence undermined by a private diagnosis she cannot escape. The three words no one in her world ever expected to be tied to her: "You have cancer." For weeks she has carried the knowledge alone, moving through the Abbott mansion like a ghost inhabiting her own life, pretending for Jack, for Kyle, for Harrison, that everything is under control, that her world isn't crumbling beneath her feet. But every time she looks in the mirror she sees the cracks forming, the exhaustion in her eyes, the quiet tremor in her hands, the terror that gnaws at her when she imagines leaving behind the family she fought so hard to reclaim. September, usually a month of transitions, of endings giving way to new beginnings, now looms for Diane as a deadline she cannot outmaneuver. And while the outside world goes on, the Abbott family battling corporate wars, Sally Spectra issuing frantic warnings about Billy, Mariah, and Daniel slipping into covert meetings, Diane fights a silent battle inside her own body, a war waged in shadows that will end not in another fake death or dramatic vanishing act but in something more permanent, more devastating. Because Susan Walter's tenure on The Young and the Restless will come to a close as Diane succumbs to her illness and leaves Genoa City behind at the end of September. The weight of this storyline is not in its shock value but in its heartbreak. Because for all the years Diane was painted as a villainess, a conniver who schemed her way into Jack Abbott's life and out of it just as quickly, her return had reshaped her legacy, giving her a second chance to forge bonds, to rebuild trust, to be a mother, a grandmother, a wife again, and now, just as those ties have begun to feel unbreakable, the cruel hand of fate rips them apart. The diagnosis lands hardest on Jack, who has spent months defending Diane from every accusation, every enemy, every whisper that she couldn't be trusted, only to realize that this time he cannot protect her from the threat she faces, that his money, his influence, his endless devotion cannot undo the cells inside her that are determined to destroy her. The quiet scenes at the Abbott estate become more haunting in September. Diane lingering at Harrison's bedside longer than usual, brushing his hair back as he sleeps and whispering promises she knows she cannot keep. Diane reaching across the breakfast table to hold Kyle's hand, her voice softer than usual as she tells him how proud she is, while Kyle senses something is wrong but cannot yet place it. Diane standing at the window in the late afternoons, watching the sunlight shift across the Abbott gardens as if trying to memorize every shade, every glimmer, as though imprinting them in her soul before she has to say goodbye. Jack, for all his strength, is undone by the news, because while he has buried countless family members before, John, Colleen, even the ghost of relationships that never were, losing Diane feels different, because this time it is not about betrayal or distance, but about the cruel inevitability of time and illness, and he cannot help but rage against it, pleading with her to fight, to seek treatments, to defy the odds as she has so many times before. But Diane, with the quiet dignity that has begun to define her in these later years, tells him that she is tired of fighting, that she has spent her entire life clawing her way through battles of her own making and the world's condemnation, and that she wants her final days to be about peace, about family, about love, not about hospitals and needles and false hopes. For Kyle, the news is shattering, because he has spent so many years resenting his mother, building walls between them, only to finally let her in again, to let himself love her without reservation. And now that bond is being ripped away just as it began to feel permanent. His grief manifests in anger, lashing out at Jack for not telling him sooner, at doctors for not having better answers, at Diane herself for keeping the truth hidden until the end of September loomed so near. But beneath that fury is the heartbreak of a boy who only ever wanted his mother's love and who now faces the unbearable knowledge that she will soon be gone. Harrison, too young to understand fully, senses the sadness in the adults around him, asking innocent questions that pierce like knives. Why is Grandma Diane so tired? And his voice, filled with confusion and fear, breaks Diane's heart more than any diagnosis ever could, because she knows that his memories of her will be fleeting, blurred by time, softened by Jack and Kyle's reassurances, and she aches to leave behind an imprint strong enough that he will always carry her with him, even when she is no longer there to hold him. As September winds toward its close, the show builds toward Diane's departure with moments both grand and intimate. A family dinner where she rises to make a toast, her voice breaking as she thanks Jack for loving her despite everything, thanks Kyle for forgiving her, thanks Harrison for reminding her of innocence and joy. A quiet scene in the Abbott garden where she kneels among the flowers, her hands brushing the petals as she whispers to the memory of her father-in-law, John Abbott, asking him to watch over the family once she is gone. A final confrontation with Phyllis, not filled with venom as so many of their encounters have been, but with an unexpected grace, Diane telling her longtime rival that she hopes their endless war can finally end, that life is too short for hatred, and Phyllis, for once, left speechless, her sharp edges softened by the realization that she is witnessing the end of an era. Susan Walters brings to these moments a raw vulnerability that strips away the layers of Diane's history, leaving only a woman who has loved fiercely, fought relentlessly, and who now faces her mortality with both fear and courage. By the time the last week of September arrives, Genoa City feels quieter, heavier, as though the town itself knows it is about to lose one of its most complicated souls. Diane's final days are spent surrounded by the people she has hurt and healed, loved and lost, reconciled with and fought against. And when she finally slips away, it is not in the midst of scandal or betrayal but in the embrace of the family she rebuilt, leaving Jack shattered but grateful for every stolen moment. Kyle broken but forever changed, Harrison clutching a locket she pressed into his hand, and viewers left mourning not just a character but the end of Susan Walters' unforgettable run. The departure is not a twist or a trick, it is a reckoning, a reminder that even in the heightened world of soap operas, death and illness can cut through the fantasy with devastating realism, and that sometimes the most shocking story is the simplest one. That even the strongest, most resilient, most scheming characters cannot escape the fragility of life. As September rolled deeper toward its inevitable close, Diane's secret could no longer be contained, because though she had managed for weeks to cloak her fragility beneath elegant blouses and carefully painted smiles, the truth had a way of seeping out in small betrayals. Her sudden fatigue at the Abbott breakfast table, the tremor in her voice when Harrison tugged on her sleeve, the nights Jack awoke to find her standing silently at the window, tears staining her cheeks in the moonlight, and, when the family finally gathered in the Abbott living room, Diane could no longer shield them from reality, her voice quivering as she confessed to Kyle and Summer that the reason she had seemed distant, the reason she had been quietly organizing files, writing letters, and spending so much time with Harrison, was not because she had another scheme in motion, but because she was dying, and though her words fell into the hush of the room like a thunderclap, silence reigned only for a moment. Before Kyle's anguished protest shattered it, his voice breaking as he demanded she take it back, that she stop lying, because how could the mother he had only just learned to love again abandon him now? Diane reached for his hands, tears streaming freely as she told him that this was the one battle she could not manipulate, the one enemy she could not outwit, and though she had always been a fighter, she no longer had the strength to pretend that she could win. Her only wish now was to make her final days meaningful, to ensure that the love they shared in this brief reprieve of peace would carry him, Harrison, and even Jack forward after she was gone. For Jack, sitting beside her on the sofa, the weight of her confession landed like an avalanche, burying him in memories of all the years they had danced this jagged dance of love, betrayal, redemption, and forgiveness. And though he wanted to rage against fate, to promise her that he would find the best doctors, the newest treatments, the miracle she deserved, Diane's gentle shake of the head silenced him, her voice firm but kind as she told him that what she needed was not another fight, but his acceptance, his presence, his love to steady her as the end approached. Summer, torn between her loyalty to Kyle and her own complicated history with Diane, sat in stunned quiet, her mind racing with the realization that the woman she had once resented for manipulating her family had become, in the end, a grandmother to her child, a stabilizing presence she had never expected, and though her heart ached with the pain this would inflict on Kyle, she also knew that Diane's courage in facing the truth deserved respect rather than bitterness. In the days that followed, Diane orchestrated her goodbyes with the same precision she had once used to scheme, but now her purpose was love, not manipulation. She met with Ashley Abbott in the quiet of society, offering her a fragile olive branch, acknowledging that though they had never been friends, she hoped Ashley would look out for Jack in the aftermath, because he would need his sister more than ever. She sought out Tracy Abbott, the heart of the family, and thanked her for her endless kindness, confessing that in another life she wished she had been more like her, capable of gentleness without losing strength. She even sat down with Phyllis Summers, her eternal rival, in a scene that stunned them both with its honesty, Diane admitting that she regretted the wasted years of hatred and competition, that she hoped Phyllis would forgive her, not for her sake, but for Kyle's and Harrison's, and Phyllis, for once, found herself speechless, her sharp retorts withering in the face of a woman stripped of artifice and facing her mortality with dignity. One by one, Diane tied up the loose ends of her tumultuous life, not to erase her sins but to leave behind a tapestry of reconciliation, because she wanted Kyle to remember her not as the woman who had faked her death or manipulated Jack, but as the mother who, in the end, chose truth and peace. Meanwhile, Jack spiraled under the weight of impending loss, his every waking moment consumed by the knowledge that he would soon wake to a house without her laughter, without her presence, and though he tried to be strong for her, for Kyle, for Harrison, the cracks showed in quiet moments, when he clutched at old photographs, when he lingered too long in her empty chair, when he whispered promises to the universe that he would give anything, even his company, his legacy, if it meant keeping her by his side a little longer. Kyle, in his grief, lashed out at everyone. At Jack for not forcing Diane into treatment, at doctors for offering nothing but sympathy, at the world for robbing him of his mother just as he had learned to love her. But at night, when he sat beside Harrison's bed and listened to his son's gentle breathing, he realized that his mother's greatest gift was not her survival, but the legacy of love she had carved into their lives in her final weeks, and he vowed to honor that by being the father she believed he could be. Harrison, too young to understand, clung tighter to Diane in her last days, his small arms wrapped around her neck, his innocent voice begging her not to go. And though Diane's heart broke with each plea, she smiled through the tears, whispering that she would always be with him, in the stars, in the flowers, in the love of his daddy and grandpa, and she pressed a silver locket into his palm, a keepsake he would carry long after memories blurred. As the final days of September bled away, Diane grew weaker, her presence at the Abbott estate like a flickering candle flame that everyone gathered around to protect. And in her last evening, surrounded by Jack, Kyle, Harrison, and Tracy, she asked for one final family dinner in the garden, the place she had once feared to step into but had grown to see as home. They shared stories, laughter through tears, and when the meal ended, Diane raised her glass with trembling hands and toasted to love, to second chances, to the family that had made her final chapter the most meaningful of her life. Later that night, as Jack held her hand, Diane's breathing slowed, her eyes locked on his, and with her last strength she whispered, "Thank you, for loving me, even when I didn't deserve it," before closing her eyes for the last time, leaving the Abbott mansion in a silence so profound it felt like the world itself had paused to mourn. Susan Walter's departure, written with heartbreaking finality, left Genoa City reeling, Jack devastated, Kyle broken but determined, Harrison clutching his locket, Phyllis reflecting on grudges that now seemed meaningless, Ashley and Tracy rallying to hold the family together, and Victor Newman himself pausing in his war against Billy to acknowledge that, for all her faults, Diane had been a formidable presence, and now she was gone, leaving behind a legacy that was equal parts scandal and redemption, villainy and grace, but above all, human fragility. In the wake of Diane's final breath, the Abbott mansion fell into a silence so heavy it was almost suffocating, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls and seeped into the very air. And though the family sat together in the living room, no one quite knew how to speak, how to move, how to even breathe without her presence filling the space. Jack, broken and hollow, sat in her favorite chair with his head bowed, his usually composed demeanor shattered into raw grief, and for the first time in decades, John Abbott's eldest son looked like a little boy again, lost and frightened without the woman he had fought so hard to keep, while Kyle hovered near the fireplace with Harrison curled in his lap, tears streaking down his face as he rocked his son gently, whispering promises that everything would be okay even though he wasn't sure he believed it himself, and Tracy, the heart of the Abbott family, quietly moved through the room like an anchor, offering tissues, hugs, whispered comfort, though her own eyes were swollen with tears because even she, the eternal optimist, could not deny the gaping hole Diane's absence had carved into their lives. News of Diane's passing spread through Genoa City with a speed that was both shocking and inevitable, because for all her controversies, for all her schemes and reinventions, Diane Jenkins Abbott was a name everyone knew, a presence no one ignored. And as word reached society, Crimson Lights, and Newman Enterprises, the reactions rippled in ways no one had anticipated. Phyllis, who had sworn that she would never shed a tear for Diane, found herself standing alone in her suite, staring at her reflection with shaking hands, muttering curses at herself as tears rolled unbidden down her cheeks, not because she suddenly forgave her rival, but because death had a way of stripping grudges bare, making them seem petty in the face of finality. And though she hated Diane for years, she could not deny that the woman had been a fighter, a mother, and in her own way, a survivor until she couldn't survive anymore. At Newman Enterprises, Nikki paused during a meeting, her mind drifting back to the battles she had once fought with Diane, battles that had once seemed so significant, and she sighed deeply, murmuring that life was too short for such endless warfare, while Victor Newman, standing by his office window, stared out at the city and admitted to himself that though he had never trusted Diane, he respected her resilience, and he would see to it that Kyle was protected, because whatever their differences, Diane had been the mother of Jack's son, and that counted for something. Ashley, conflicted and restless, wrestled with the guilt that her last words to Diane had been harsh, that she had never truly let her guard down long enough to consider reconciliation. And though she had spent years warning Jack about Diane's manipulations, she now found herself wishing she had given her more grace in those final days, because death had stolen the chance to ever take back the sharp words and cutting accusations. Meanwhile, Billy Abbott, caught up in his own battles, found himself unexpectedly shaken by the news, because though he and Diane had never been close, he had grown up in a house where her name was often whispered in anger or worry, and to hear that she was gone reminded him that time had no mercy, that tomorrow was never promised, and it left him with an aching urge to cling tighter to those he loved. In quieter corners of Genoa City, conversations turned reflective. Lauren Fenmore recalled the times Diane had intersected with her world and admitted to Michael that she felt an odd pang of sympathy, because losing someone to cancer was a pain she wouldn't wish on anyone. And Sharon Rosales, always empathetic, organized a candlelit vigil at Crimson Lights, not as a statement of forgiveness or approval but as a gesture of compassion for Kyle, Harrison, and Jack, who she knew were drowning in sorrow. The Abbott mansion itself became a revolving door of mourners, allies, rivals, and curious neighbors, all drawn to pay their respects, to offer condolences, to perhaps catch a glimpse of a family so fractured now struggling to hold itself together. And though Jack appreciated the gestures, he found himself retreating more and more into solitude, closing the study doors and surrounding himself with photographs of Diane, replaying their last conversations in his head, the sound of her voice echoing like a ghost that would never fade. Kyle, torn between grief and anger, threw himself into caring for Harrison, determined that his son would not carry the same scars he had endured when Diane faked her death years ago. But the weight of history pressed heavily on him, and at night, when Harrison was asleep, he would pace the halls, whispering into the empty air that he wasn't ready to do this without her, that he needed her guidance, her love, her steadying presence, even if it had come so late in life. Summer, ever practical, found herself stepping into a caretaker role for both Kyle and Harrison, her loyalty deepening as she watched the man she loved unravel. And though she had once distrusted Diane, she now felt a strange sense of kinship with her, because she understood, perhaps more than anyone, how much Diane had tried to make amends in those final months, and she vowed to help carry forward that legacy. As the funeral approached, Genoa City buzzed with anticipation, because it was not simply a goodbye to Diane but the closing of a chapter that had defined decades of scandal, redemption, betrayal, and love. And when the day arrived, the pews of the chapel were filled with faces from every corner of the town, Jack sitting in the front row, his hand clasping Kyle's tightly, Harrison clutching his locket in the center of the family, Tracy gently rubbing Jack's back, Ashley sitting stiff and somber, Phyllis surprisingly present, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses, Nikki and Victor in attendance, Lauren and Michael offering quiet comfort, Sharon guiding guests with her warm presence, and even Tucker McCall lingering in the shadows, his face unreadable as he listened to the eulogies. The service itself was a mosaic of emotion. Tracy spoke of forgiveness and second chances, her words a balm to those who still wrestled with conflicted feelings. Kyle, his voice breaking, spoke of the mother he had lost once and regained too late, declaring that though their time was short, it was filled with love he would cherish forever. And Jack, in the most heart-wrenching moment of the service, rose to his feet, his voice trembling as he admitted that Diane had been the greatest challenge and the greatest love of his life, that she had taught him patience, endurance, and ultimately the power of redemption, and that though the world might remember her for her mistakes, he would remember her for the love she gave him in the end.